Your fear isn't true. It's a paper tiger, and it's been silently controlling your choices for years. In the next few minutes, you'll reclaim your power and unlock the clarity to act without hesitation. Kill your fear. Introduction. You know that feeling. The subtle tightening in your chest when opportunity presents itself. The sudden racing of thoughts, each one a detailed prediction of everything that could go wrong. The almost imperceptible pull towards safety, away from expansion and growth. This is fear in its most common form, not the dramatic, heart-pounding variety that accompanies genuine danger, but the quiet, persistent kind that shapes your daily choices in ways you might not even recognize. These seemingly small fears accumulate over time, creating an invisible prison of self-imposed limitations. They manifest in the promotion you don't pursue, the conversation you avoid, the dream you perpetually postpone. Most frustrating is the clarity with which you can see what needs to be done, contrasted against the mysterious force that prevents you from taking action. But what if everything you believe about fear is based on a fundamental misunderstanding? What if fear isn't the immovable obstacle it appears to be, but rather a misinterpreted signal? One that, when properly understood, becomes your most reliable compass for growth. This book isn't about eliminating fear or pushing through it with sheer willpower. Those approaches, while popular, fundamentally misunderstand fear's role in human development. The absence of fear has never been a reliable indicator of readiness, just as its presence has never been a reliable indicator of danger. Freedom doesn't come from escaping fear. It comes from transforming your relationship with it entirely. Throughout these chapters, you won't find traditional techniques or step-by-step strategies. Instead, you'll encounter powerful metaphors and perspective-shifting insights that illuminate fear's true nature. This approach recognizes that lasting change comes not from trying harder, but from seeing differently. When you truly understand what fear is, and more importantly, what it isn't, action becomes your natural state rather than something you must force. The transformation available to you is profound. What if every moment of hesitation could become a reliable signal pointing directly toward your next breakthrough? What if the very situations that trigger your strongest resistance mark the exact path you must follow? What if emotional discomfort wasn't evidence you're doing something wrong, but confirmation you're growing in exactly the right direction? By the final page of this book, you won't merely have strategies for facing fear. You'll have fundamentally altered your perception of it. Where you once saw warning signs, you'll recognize invitations. Where you once felt resistance, you'll discover excitement. And most significantly, where hesitation once lived, you'll find an addiction to action that propels you forward with unstoppable momentum. Your transformation begins now. Chapter 1. The Paper Tiger. Understanding Fear's Illusion. Your hand hovers over the phone, heart pounding against your chest, palms slick with sweat, mind racing through every possible way this conversation could go wrong. The physical sensations are unmistakable. Elevated heart rate, shallow breathing, muscles tensing for action. Your body is responding as if you're facing a life-threatening situation rather than making a simple phone call. This physiological response, this full activation of your survival system, raises a crucial question. Why does your body react to non-threatening situations as if your very survival hangs in the balance? The answer lies in understanding one of the most fascinating aspects of human evolution, your brain's threat detection system. Throughout human history, this system served as a masterful protection mechanism. when a rustling in the grass could mean a predator, or a wrong move in a social hierarchy could mean exile and death. This hair trigger alert system kept our ancestors alive. The amygdala, that ancient part of your brain responsible for detecting threats, developed a better safe than sorry approach. It became extraordinarily good at one thing: generating immediate physiological responses to potential threats without waiting for detailed analysis. This system continues to function exactly as designed. The challenge is that it hasn't received a significant update since our ancestors faced daily survival threats. Your amygdala cannot distinguish between a charging lion and an upcoming presentation. It responds to social rejection with the same intensity as physical danger. When you feel the impulse to avoid making that phone call, attending that event, or speaking up in that meeting, you're experiencing the exact same biological cascade that protected your ancestors from predators. But here's what makes this insight transformative. Understanding this mechanism reveals fear for what it truly is: an optical illusion. Like a shadow that appears massive and menacing from a distance but shrinks to actual size upon approach, fear creates a distortion of reality that dissolves under direct inspection. Think of fear as a paper tiger, fierce and intimidating in appearance, but hollow and insubstantial upon closer examination. From a distance, its sharp teeth and fierce eyes trigger your threat response system. Your brain, playing it safe, generates all the physiological symptoms of genuine danger. But upon direct approach, you discover its true nature: a flat, empty facade with no actual power to harm you. You might be thinking, but this particular fear feels different. What if this specific fear is actually trying to protect me from a real threat? This is your threat detection system doing exactly what it's designed to do, making the potential threat feel as real and significant as possible. Remember, the system is programmed to convince you the danger is real. That's its job. The intensity of the fear says nothing about the actual level of threat. It merely reflects how effectively your survival system is doing its job. When you approach fear directly rather than retreat from it, something remarkable happens. The sensations don't immediately disappear. Your heart might still race, your palms might still sweat. But your relationship to these sensations transforms. Instead of interpreting them as evidence of danger, you recognize them as the natural activation of an ancient survival system, responding to a modern situation it wasn't designed to handle. What paper tigers are you facing in your life right now? What situations trigger your survival response despite posing no actual threat to your physical safety? The next time you feel fear's familiar sensations arising, remember, you're not experiencing the presence of danger. You're experiencing the incredible efficiency of a survival system that's working exactly as designed. The fear isn't a wall. It's a projection, as insubstantial as a shadow, as hollow as a paper tiger. This fundamental truth, that fear's power comes primarily from misinterpretation, opens the door to a revolutionary possibility. What if these fear responses, rather than being warning signals to retreat, are actually pointing you toward your most important opportunities for growth? Chapter 2. The Compass, Not the Storm. Reframing Fear as Direction. You stand backstage at the conference center, your presentation slides ready, your notes meticulously prepared. Yet your racing heart and trembling hands feel like warning signals, your body's urgent message to escape. At this moment, like countless others facing similar situations, you interpret these sensations as evidence that you're not ready, that you should avoid public speaking altogether. This interpretation seems natural, even logical. After all, why would your body react so strongly if this wasn't dangerous? But what if you're misreading these signals entirely? What if this physiological response isn't a warning to retreat, but rather a compass pointing directly toward your next breakthrough? This perspective shift changes everything. Consider how a compass operates in a storm. The turbulent conditions don't invalidate the compass's accuracy. They simply make it more challenging to read the valuable directional information it provides. Your fear response works similarly. The discomfort you feel isn't the message, it's just the storm surrounding the real signal. This reframing illuminates a profound truth about human growth. The experiences that trigger our strongest resistance often mark the exact path we need to follow for meaningful expansion. Just as a muscle must encounter resistance to grow stronger, your capacity for handling challenges only expands when you push beyond your current comfort zone. Therefore, the very presence of fear can serve as reliable confirmation that you're facing an opportunity for significant growth. Think about the most transformative experiences in any person's life: giving a keynote speech, starting a business, having a difficult but necessary conversation, or stepping into a leadership role. These moments universally trigger resistance precisely because they require expansion beyond existing limitations. The sensation of fear in these situations isn't a malfunction. It's operating exactly as designed, highlighting opportunities for profound personal development. Understanding this dynamic transforms how you interpret everyday challenges. When you feel resistance to speaking up in meetings, rather than reading it as a sign to remain silent, you can recognize it as your compass pointing toward greater professional authority. When networking events trigger anxiety, instead of seeing a reason to avoid them, you can identify an opportunity to expand your influence and connection. This shift in interpretation, from viewing fear as a warning to seeing it as a compass, fundamentally alters your relationship with challenging situations. Instead of asking, "How can I avoid this discomfort?" you begin asking, "What growth is this discomfort pointing toward?" This reframing doesn't eliminate the sensation of fear, but it completely transforms its meaning and utility. The implications of this perspective shift extend far beyond individual challenging moments. By understanding fear as directional information rather than a warning signal, you begin to recognize patterns in your resistance. Areas of life that consistently trigger fear often indicate precisely where your greatest potential for growth lies dormant. Your hesitation to take on leadership roles, your resistance to public visibility, your discomfort with self-promotion. These aren't limitations to be accepted, but rather compass readings pointing toward your next level of development. Consider how differently you might approach challenges with this understanding. Rather than interpreting sweaty palms and a racing heart as evidence you should avoid public speaking, you recognize these sensations as confirmation you're facing a genuine opportunity for growth. Instead of reading social anxiety as a sign to minimize your visibility, you understand it as your compass pointing toward greater, authentic expression. This reframing reveals something profound about personal development. Your emotional responses aren't random. They're highly calibrated indicators highlighting precisely where your next breakthrough awaits. The key isn't to eliminate these responses, but to read them accurately, to distinguish between the storm of sensation and the valuable directional information it contains. Chapter 3: The Waiting Room: How Delay Magnifies Fear. When you postpone that crucial conversation with your colleague, boss, or loved one, your mind immediately begins crafting elaborate scenarios. Each passing hour adds new layers of complexity to your fears, transforming a straightforward discussion into an increasingly daunting challenge. What started as mild apprehension grows into paralyzing anxiety, making the conversation feel more impossible with each delay. This paradox of postponement reveals a crucial truth about fear. Waiting until you feel ready often achieves the opposite of what you intend. Instead of diminishing your anxiety, delay creates an expansive canvas for your mind to paint increasingly detailed pictures of potential disasters. Your brain, designed to protect you through anticipation, works overtime to simulate every possible negative outcome, constructing intricate failure scenarios that bear little resemblance to reality. Think of fear like a shadow cast by an object in the late afternoon sun. The further you stand from the object, the longer and more distorted its shadow becomes. Similarly, the more distance you place between yourself and the action you need to take, the more exaggerated and unrealistic your fears grow. This distortion doesn't protect you, it paralyzes you, making eventual action even more challenging. Your mind's remarkable ability to simulate future scenarios, evolved as a survival mechanism to help ancestors anticipate and avoid genuine threats, now often works against you in modern contexts. When facing social, professional, or personal challenges, this same capacity for simulation can trap you in a psychological waiting room where problems expand rather than contract. Each moment spent in this waiting room allows your fears to compound, like interest accumulating on a debt that grows more burdensome with time. The instinct to wait until you feel ready seems logical on the surface. After all, shouldn't you feel prepared before tackling important challenges? But this reasoning contains a fundamental flaw. Readiness rarely arrives through waiting. The sensation of fear doesn't typically dissolve through passage of time alone. It dissolves through action. This insight reveals a powerful truth. The gap between what you anticipate and what actually occurs when you take action is often vast. Your mind's fear forecasting system consistently overestimates risks while underestimating your capacity to handle challenges. When you compare your detailed disaster scenarios with the actual outcomes of taking action, you'll find reality is rarely as catastrophic as imagination suggests. Consider the distinction between fear forecasting and reality recording. Fear forecasting involves your mind's elaborate predictions about what might go wrong, predictions that often spiral into unlikely worst-case scenarios. Reality recording, on the other hand, involves observing what actually happens when you take action. When you begin paying attention to this comparison, patterns emerge. You'll notice how your brain's catastrophic predictions rarely match the manageable reality you encounter when you finally act. This understanding provides a crucial key for breaking free from the cycle of delay. Immediate action, despite initial discomfort, ultimately creates less suffering than prolonged anticipation. The temporary spike in anxiety you feel when taking action pales in comparison to the accumulated stress of extended postponement. The implications of this insight extend beyond individual challenging situations. By recognizing how delay amplifies fear while action dissolves it, you begin to see procrastination not as a protection strategy but as a fear multiplication system. This realization naturally pushes you toward timely action, not because you've mustered extraordinary courage, but because you understand that waiting typically makes things worse, not better. This shift in understanding transforms how you approach uncomfortable situations. Rather than waiting for fear to subside before acting, you recognize that action itself is the pathway to reduced fear. The temporary discomfort of taking action becomes preferable to the expanding discomfort of delay, creating a natural motivation to move forward despite initial resistance. Through this lens, fear reveals itself not as a barrier requiring lengthy preparation to overcome, but as a signal indicating where immediate action will serve you best. Each moment spent in delay doesn't bring you closer to readiness. It simply allows fear to grow more elaborate and convincing in its attempts to hold you back. When you grasp this fundamental truth, the path forward becomes startlingly clear. Your instinct to wait until you feel more confident or better prepared suddenly appears as what it truly is, a subtle form of self-sabotage masquerading as prudence. The very discomfort you feel when contemplating action becomes your most reliable indicator of which direction leads to growth, transforming what once seemed like warning signals into clear markers of opportunity. Chapter 4. The Doorway. Why Discomfort Signals Opportunity. Your palms grow sweaty as you stare at the blank document on your screen. The project ahead feels overwhelming, almost impossible. Every cell in your body screams to close the laptop, to choose something easier, more familiar. This visceral discomfort feels like a clear warning to retreat. But what if you're misinterpreting one of the most valuable signals life offers? In the vast landscape of human achievement, a peculiar pattern emerges. Moments of greatest resistance often precede periods of most significant growth. This isn't coincidence or cruel design. It's the natural byproduct of how your brain processes the unknown. Your nervous system, optimized through evolution to keep you safe, interprets any deviation from the familiar as a potential threat. This creates an interesting paradox. The very experiences that lead to your development trigger internal resistance, precisely because they represent expansion beyond your current capabilities. Consider how a muscle grows stronger. The sensation of strain during exercise isn't a warning to stop. It's the essential stimulus that triggers adaptation. Similarly, the mental and emotional discomfort you feel when approaching a challenging project, conversation, or opportunity isn't evidence you're on the wrong path. Instead, this resistance marks the threshold of your next evolution. Your brain craves certainty and predictability. It's constantly working to conserve energy by steering you toward familiar patterns and behaviors. This biological programming served your ancestors well when survival depended on avoiding unnecessary risks. However, in today's world, this same mechanism often prevents you from stepping into experiences that foster growth. The doorway metaphor illuminates this dynamic perfectly. Every significant transition in life, whether personal, professional, or spiritual, requires passing through a threshold. Standing at this threshold, you feel the full weight of leaving known territory. Your body responds with physical sensations of anxiety and resistance. Your mind generates compelling reasons to turn back. This response feels like protection, but it's actually a marker, a sign that you're standing at the entrance to new capability. Understanding this relationship between discomfort and growth transforms how you interpret internal resistance. When you feel that strong urge to retreat from a challenge, recognize that you're likely encountering a doorway rather than a dead end. The sensation of wanting to turn back doesn't mean you're making a mistake. It means you're at the exact point where breakthrough becomes possible. This perspective shift raises natural questions. Shouldn't some things feel easy if they're aligned with your path? Doesn't persistent discomfort sometimes indicate a genuine mismatch? These valid concerns point to an important distinction. Not all discomfort signals growth opportunity. The key lies in learning to distinguish between the resistance that precedes expansion and the friction that warns of misalignment. Productive discomfort typically carries a peculiar signature, a simultaneous sense of attraction and repulsion. You feel drawn toward the opportunity even as you want to avoid it. The challenge resonates with your deeper aspirations even as it triggers fear. This mixed signal often indicates you're facing a genuine growth threshold. In contrast, pure aversion without any underlying pull usually signals genuine misalignment. When an opportunity or path feels wrong at a fundamental level, without any sense of potential expansion, the discomfort serves as a legitimate warning rather than a growth marker. Your body's response to a growth threshold also differs from its reaction to genuine danger. Growth-related discomfort tends to be more anticipatory than immediate. It intensifies when you think about the challenge, but often diminishes once you begin taking action. This differs from the sharp, immediate discomfort that signals real threat or misalignment. This reframing of discomfort as a threshold marker rather than a warning sign transforms your relationship with challenging situations. Instead of interpreting resistance as evidence to retreat, you begin recognizing it as information about where your next level of growth awaits. The sensation of wanting to step back often indicates you're precisely where you need to be for meaningful expansion. Notice how this perspective shift doesn't require eliminating the discomfort. It simply changes your interpretation of it. The physical sensations may remain, but their meaning transforms from warning to waypoint. This new understanding creates space to move forward, not despite the discomfort, but because of what it signifies. The transformation of your relationship with fear requires this fundamental reinterpretation of uncomfortable sensations. As you learn to recognize resistance as a marker of opportunity rather than an obstacle, you develop the capacity to use discomfort as a compass pointing toward growth rather than a barrier preventing progress. Chapter 5. The Echo Chamber. Breaking Free from Fear-Based Thinking. Standing at the edge of action, your mind becomes a cavern where each worried thought reverberates and multiplies. One concern spawns 10 more, each reflection growing louder and more distorted than the last. What begins as a simple what if transforms into an avalanche of catastrophic possibilities until the very thought of moving forward feels overwhelming. This mental echo chamber represents one of fear's most powerful mechanisms. Its ability to create an environment where initial concerns multiply and distort through endless internal reflection. Within this closed system of thought, your brain's natural tendency to scan for threats combines with fear's amplifying effect, creating a perception of reality that bears little resemblance to actual circumstances. Your mind's negativity bias, an evolutionary adaptation that helped your ancestors survive by remaining hypervigilant to potential dangers, now works overtime in situations where no physical threat exists. This perceptual filter actively searches for evidence that confirms your worst fears, while simultaneously discounting or completely filtering out information that might challenge these fears. The result is a self-reinforcing cycle where each worried thought seems to validate and strengthen the others. Inside this echo chamber, your mind becomes convinced of outcomes that haven't happened yet, treating possibilities as certainties. A fleeting thought about potential failure transforms into an absolute conviction that failure is inevitable. The possibility of judgment becomes a certainty of harsh criticism. What might be a minor setback in reality appears as a catastrophic and unrecoverable loss when viewed through fear's distorting lens. The challenge lies in recognizing when you're caught in this pattern. From inside the echo chamber, these distorted perceptions feel completely real and justified. Your brain presents compelling evidence for every worried thought, creating an internally consistent but fundamentally inaccurate representation of reality. The very same situation can appear radically different when viewed from outside this fear-based thinking pattern. Understanding this dynamic reveals why simply trying to think positive rarely works when caught in fear's grip. The echo chamber doesn't just amplify negative thoughts, it actively filters out contradicting evidence. This explains why even past successes and positive experiences often fail to penetrate fear's distorting effect. Your mind dismisses them as irrelevant or explains them away, maintaining the integrity of its fear-based narrative. The key to breaking free from this pattern lies not in forcing different thoughts, but in recognizing when you've entered the echo chamber. By understanding how fear distorts perception, you can learn to identify when your thinking has become self-reinforcing rather than reality-based. This awareness creates space for a crucial question. Am I seeing the situation clearly, or am I caught in fear's amplification cycle? When you notice your mind spinning elaborate scenarios of future disaster, generating multiple layers of worry about worry, or treating uncertain outcomes as inevitable failures, these are reliable signals that you've entered the echo chamber. The very recognition of this pattern begins to break its power, creating a crack in the closed system where fresh perspective can enter. By stepping back and observing how your thoughts multiply and distort within this mental environment, you begin to distinguish between legitimate concerns and fear's amplified echoes. This doesn't mean dismissing all cautionary thoughts. Some concerns serve a valuable protective function. Instead, it means developing the ability to recognize when fear has created a closed loop of escalating worry that no longer reflects reality. This understanding transforms your relationship with worried thoughts. Rather than getting caught in their content, trying to address each concern as if it were equally valid, you learn to recognize when fear's echo chamber has distorted your perception. This awareness itself often provides immediate relief, as you realize you're not seeing reality, but rather experiencing fear's amplification effect. The power of fear's echo chamber lies in its invisibility. When caught inside, the distorted perceptions feel completely natural and justified. Each anxious thought seems to confirm the validity of the others, creating an internally consistent but fundamentally distorted view of reality. But by understanding this mechanism, you gain the ability to recognize when you've entered this mental environment. The very qualities that make it so convincing, the seamless way one worry flows into another, the apparent logic of each escalating concern, become telltale signs that you're experiencing fear's amplification rather than reality. This recognition creates the space needed for more accurate perception, allowing you to see situations as they are rather than as fear portrays them. You begin to notice the subtle difference between genuine intuition and fear's deceptive certainty, between realistic caution and anxiety's exaggerated warnings. Chapter 6: The Spotlight Effect. Overcoming the Illusion of Judgment. You feel the weight of countless eyes upon you as you consider taking that next bold step. The presentation you're preparing, the creative project you want to launch, the unconventional choice you're contemplating. Each possibility comes with an overwhelming sense of being center stage, scrutinized by an imagined audience ready to judge every misstep. This sensation of being perpetually observed and evaluated creates an invisible prison, keeping you safely within the bounds of what feels acceptable to others. The fear of judgment becomes a constant companion, whispering warnings about potential criticism, rejection, or social consequences of stepping beyond conventional boundaries. Yet this intense spotlight you feel focused upon your every move is largely an illusion, a trick of perception that your mind creates. Research in social psychology consistently reveals a phenomenon called the spotlight effect, where we dramatically overestimate how much attention others pay to our actions, appearance, and decisions. While you feel every eye in the room tracking your movements, most people are far too absorbed in their own concerns to notice, let alone judge, the details that consume your attention. This heightened self-consciousness stems from our evolutionary past, where social acceptance meant survival. Our ancestors depended on group inclusion for protection, resources, and reproduction. Those who were highly attuned to social judgment were more likely to maintain their position within the group and pass on their genes. This ancient programming still runs in your modern brain, creating an exaggerated sense of social scrutiny, even when your survival no longer depends on unanimous group approval. Consider the reality of social attention. At any given moment, most people are wrestling with their own insecurities, preoccupied with their own challenges, and focused primarily on their own experiences. They're starring in their own mental performance, complete with imagined audience and anticipated criticism. The spotlight you feel so intensely is actually one of countless individual spotlights, each person standing in their own beam of perceived attention. This understanding doesn't diminish the very real sensation of being watched and evaluated. The fear of judgment feels overwhelming precisely because it taps into such fundamental human concerns about acceptance and belonging. However, recognizing the exaggerated nature of this fear opens the door to greater freedom of action. The next time you feel paralyzed by potential judgment, zoom out and observe the larger social landscape. Notice how most people are too engaged with their own experiences to maintain the detailed mental ledger of your actions that fear assumes they keep. Consider how quickly you forget the small mistakes or unconventional choices of others, and recognize that they likely extend the same casual attention to your decisions. This reality check doesn't require dismissing social awareness entirely. It simply involves calibrating it to actual rather than imagined levels of scrutiny. When you recognize that the spotlight is largely self-generated, you can begin making choices based on your authentic desires rather than anticipated judgment. The freedom this understanding offers extends far beyond momentary relief from social anxiety. It creates space for bold action, creative expression, and authentic living. When you realize that most of your imagined audience is actually focused elsewhere, you can step out of the self-imposed spotlight and into genuine self-expression. Your fear of judgment served an essential purpose in human evolution, helping your ancestors maintain the social bonds necessary for survival. But in today's world, this same fear often prevents you from taking the very actions that would lead to growth, connection, and fulfillment. By understanding its exaggerated nature, you can begin to see this fear for what it is: a useful but often misleading signal that deserves questioning rather than automatic obedience. The path to freedom lies not in eliminating social awareness, but in seeing it clearly for what it is: a natural human tendency that often distorts reality through magnification. When you recognize that the spotlight is primarily self-generated, you can begin to act with greater authenticity, focusing more on what truly matters to you than on managing an imagined audience's response. This shift transforms your relationship with visibility itself, moving you from constant performance to natural expression. You start noticing how much mental energy you previously spent crafting and maintaining an image, energy that can now flow toward genuine engagement with life. The irony is that this authenticity often draws others closer, creating the very connections you once tried to force through careful self-monitoring. Chapter 7. The Alchemist. Converting Fear into Fuel. When fear arises in your body, you likely interpret it as a warning signal, a flashing red light indicating danger or suggesting retreat. Your heart races, your breath quickens, your senses heighten, and your entire system floods with energy. For most of your life, you've learned to read these sensations as anxiety, stress, or impending doom. But what if this interpretation itself is the only thing standing between you and breakthrough performance? The fascinating truth is that the physiological state you interpret as fear is nearly identical to what high performers experience as excitement and peak motivation. Your racing heart, quickened breath, and heightened awareness. These aren't inherently negative signals. They represent your body mobilizing its resources, preparing you to engage fully with whatever challenge lies ahead. This isn't merely positive thinking or reframing. It's rooted in solid research. Studies consistently show that the physiological arousal we experience in challenging situations is essentially neutral. Whether that energy becomes debilitating anxiety or empowering excitement depends almost entirely on how we interpret it. When people are taught to consciously relabel their nervous arousal as excitement rather than anxiety, their performance measurably improves across various challenging situations. Think of yourself as an alchemist, those ancient practitioners who sought to transform base metals into gold. While they never succeeded in their literal quest, you possess a far more practical form of alchemy, the ability to transform fear energy into fuel for action. Just as an alchemist would have viewed lead not as a worthless metal, but as raw material for transformation, you can learn to see fear not as an obstacle, but as pure potential energy waiting to be redirected. Your body doesn't know the difference between fear and excitement. It's creating the same chemical cocktail either way. When you feel your heart racing before a presentation, your system isn't trying to warn you of danger. It's preparing you to perform at your peak. That surge of adrenaline isn't meant to paralyze you. It's providing the energy you need to rise to the challenge. The key lies in working with this energy rather than fighting against it. Instead of trying to calm down when you feel fear arise, acknowledge the sensation as your body's way of preparing you for optimal performance. Rather than interpreting sweaty palms and butterfly sensations as signs of inadequacy, recognize them as indicators that your system is fully engaged and ready for action. This transformation requires practice, but it follows a natural principle. Energy flows where attention goes. When you focus on interpreting arousal as helpful rather than threatening, you begin to experience its benefits rather than its limitations. The same surge that once felt overwhelming starts to feel invigorating. What previously triggered retreat becomes a signal to advance. This isn't about pretending fear doesn't exist or forcing yourself to feel differently. It's about recognizing that the energy you're experiencing is neutral, neither positive nor negative, until you assign it meaning. By consciously choosing to interpret this energy as fuel rather than fear, you tap into a powerful source of motivation that's been there all along. The physical sensations you're experiencing aren't the problem. They're actually the solution. That heightened awareness can sharpen your focus. The increased heart rate can energize your delivery. The surge of adrenaline can enhance your performance. What once felt like anxiety can become the very force that propels you forward. This transformation occurs not through fighting or suppressing fear, but through a fundamental shift in how you relate to it. Just as an alchemist would have approached their work with patience and precision, this shift requires conscious attention to how you interpret bodily sensations in challenging moments. The goal isn't to eliminate these sensations, but to recognize them as the raw material of peak performance. When you feel fear arise, pause and acknowledge it. Notice the energy moving through your body. Rather than immediately labeling it as anxiety, get curious about how this same energy could serve you. Let yourself consider that these exact sensations are what athletes, performers, and leaders experience in their moments of greatest achievement. The art of transforming fear into fuel doesn't require you to become fearless. It invites you to become fear-fluent. Understanding that these sensations represent potential energy rather than problematic emotions opens up new possibilities for how you engage with challenges. What once felt like a barrier becomes a launch pad for action. This marks the beginning of a new relationship with fear energy, one where you recognize it not as an opponent to be conquered, but as an ally to be channeled. Your task isn't to eliminate these sensations, but to redirect them, transforming what once held you back into the very force that moves you forward. Chapter 8: The Mind's Movie Theater. Reprogramming Mental Projections. When you stand at the threshold of any meaningful challenge, your mind automatically begins its familiar routine, projecting vivid scenes of potential failure, embarrassment, or disaster. These mental movies play with such clarity and conviction that they feel less like imagination and more like previews of inevitable reality. Your heart rate accelerates, your stomach tightens, and taking action begins to feel impossible, all before you've taken a single step. This powerful simulation capacity of your mind, its ability to vividly project future scenarios, evolved to help you anticipate and avoid threats. In humanity's early days, this negative bias served a crucial survival function. Those who constantly scanned for and imagined potential dangers were more likely to survive and pass on their genes. But in today's world, this same capacity often works against you, creating vivid disaster scenarios that bear little resemblance to actual probability. You are simultaneously the projectionist and the viewer in your mental theater. The scenes playing across your mind's screen feel objective and inevitable, but they are constructions, movies you are unconsciously choosing to play. While you cannot prevent your mind from generating these previews, you can recognize them as projections rather than predictions. The brain's default setting favors negative projections. When faced with uncertainty, it automatically generates worst-case scenarios with remarkable detail and emotional impact. This isn't a personal failing or sign of weakness. It's the natural programming of your threat detection system doing exactly what it evolved to do. But in a modern context, this tendency creates unnecessary suffering and prevents positive action. You might argue that negative projection is simply being realistic or prepared. But there's a crucial difference between practical preparation and fear-based visualization. Preparation involves calmly considering potential challenges and developing contingency plans. Fear-based projection, on the other hand, creates emotionally charged disaster scenarios that paralyze rather than empower. Your mind will generate thousands of mental movies today, brief glimpses of potential futures that shape your emotional state and influence your actions. Each time you face uncertainty, your internal projector starts running, showing previews of possible outcomes. But unlike a real movie theater, you have the power to change what plays on the screen. This isn't about forcing yourself to only imagine positive outcomes. That would be equally unrealistic. Instead, it's about recognizing when catastrophic projections are playing and consciously choosing to run different scenarios through your mental projector. You can acknowledge potential challenges while also visualizing yourself handling them effectively. The quality of your mental movies directly impacts your capacity for action. When you repeatedly play scenes of failure, embarrassment, or disaster, you create emotional states that make forward movement feel impossible. But when you expand your internal playlist to include scenes of capability, resilience, and possible success, you generate states that support positive action. Your mind's simulation capacity is neither good nor bad. It's a tool whose impact depends entirely on how you use it. The same ability that can paralyze you with fear can also empower you with confidence when you learn to consciously direct it. This doesn't mean eliminating negative projections entirely. They'll still appear on your mental screen, but by recognizing them as projections rather than predictions, you reduce their power to control your actions. The scenarios your mind generates are not prophecies. They are possibilities being projected onto the screen of consciousness. Just as a movie theater shows different films throughout the day, your mental theater can play various versions of potential futures. The key is remembering that you ultimately control the projection booth. You can choose to replay scenes of past failures on an endless loop, or you can direct your attention toward images of growth and achievement. Your mental projector will faithfully display whatever film you feed it, whether tragedy or triumph. The power lies not in eliminating challenging scenes entirely, but in recognizing that you're the projectionist who decides which reels get the most screen time. Chapter 9. The Shadow Self. Embracing the parts of you that fear protects. When you procrastinate persistently around a particular goal, a deeper truth often lies beneath the surface of that hesitation. What appears as simple avoidance frequently conceals more profound fears about who you are, what you're truly capable of, and whether you're worthy of the success you seek. This persistent procrastination serves as a protective mechanism, keeping you safely distant from confronting vulnerable aspects of your identity that feel too threatening to acknowledge. Your fears operate like faithful guardians, standing watch over the wounded or undeveloped parts of yourself. They create elaborate diversions, endless preparation, constant busy work, or convincing rationalizations for delay, all designed to prevent you from venturing into territory that might expose these tender spots. The fear of public speaking, for instance, often masks a deeper fear of being seen fully, judged completely, or found wanting. The perpetual postponement of starting a business might shield you from confronting beliefs about your competence or worth that formed long ago. The psychological mechanism behind this protection runs deep. Your psyche naturally develops these guardians during earlier life experiences where vulnerability led to pain or disappointment. These protective fears become automatic responses, triggering whenever you approach situations that might resurface those original wounds. Yet these same fears also stand guard over your untapped potential, the capabilities, strengths, and possibilities that remain unexplored precisely because accessing them requires facing what feels unsafe. This dynamic creates a peculiar paradox. The very fears that seem to limit you actually serve an important protective function. They're not your enemies, but rather overzealous defenders, like security guards who've become so focused on preventing harm that they also block opportunities for growth. Understanding this transforms how you relate to persistent fears. Instead of battling them as obstacles, you can approach them with curiosity about what they're working so diligently to protect. Think of these protected aspects as existing in your psychological shadow, the parts of yourself kept hidden from conscious awareness, because they feel too threatening or overwhelming to face directly. These shadow elements contain both your deepest wounds and your greatest potential, making them simultaneously the source of your strongest fears and your most powerful opportunities for growth. The fear of failure, for example, often guards both painful memories of past disappointments and untapped reservoirs of resilience and capability. This understanding reveals why simply trying to push through fear often proves ineffective. When fear serves as a guardian of vulnerable identity aspects, mere force or willpower can't address the underlying dynamic. The fear will persistently resurface until you engage with what it protects. This explains why certain fears seem to resist all attempts at conventional fear-conquering techniques. They're not actually about the surface-level challenge, but about deeper identity protection. Your relationship with these fears begins to shift when you recognize their protective nature. Rather than treating them as obstacles to be overcome, you can approach them as signals pointing toward aspects of yourself that need attention, healing, or integration. This doesn't mean the fears immediately dissolve, but it transforms them from adversaries into potential allies in your growth. The shadow aspects these fears protect didn't develop arbitrarily. They formed through real experiences that taught you to guard certain parts of yourself. Your psyche created these protective mechanisms for valid reasons at the time. Acknowledging this brings compassion to your relationship with fear, making it easier to engage with what lies beneath rather than continuously fighting the surface symptoms. Understanding fear's guardian role explains why exposure alone sometimes isn't enough to create lasting change. While gradually facing fears remains important, sustainable transformation requires also attending to what those fears protect. This might mean examining long-held beliefs about your capabilities, healing old wounds around worthiness, or integrating rejected aspects of yourself that contain untapped potential. This deeper perspective on fear's protective function opens new possibilities for growth. Instead of endless battles with persistent fears, you can begin a process of gentle inquiry into what they guard. This doesn't mean recklessly exposing vulnerabilities, but rather creating safe conditions to gradually explore and integrate these protected aspects of yourself. As these shadow elements receive the attention and integration they need, the fears guarding them naturally begin to relax their vigilance. Your relationship with fear transforms from adversary to ally, each anxious signal becoming a doorway to greater self-understanding rather than a wall to tear down. The very fears that once paralyzed you become guides, pointing toward the precise areas where healing and integration will yield the most profound breakthroughs. With patience and self-compassion, you'll find that what seemed like permanent obstacles were actually temporary guardians, waiting for the right conditions to reveal their hidden gifts. Chapter 10. The Fear Threshold. Building Progressive Courage. When you witness someone confidently delivering a presentation who once trembled at the mere thought of public speaking, you're observing more than just personal triumph. You're seeing evidence of the brain's remarkable capacity for adaptation. This transformation didn't happen through positive thinking or forceful willpower, but through a systematic process of gradually expanding their capacity to handle fear-inducing situations. Your fear threshold, the point at which discomfort becomes intense enough to trigger avoidance, operates much like a thermostat. While it may seem fixed and unchangeable, this threshold proves remarkably adaptable when approached with understanding and intentional practice. The neuroscience behind this phenomenon reveals that your brain's threat detection system constantly updates its assessment of what constitutes danger based on repeated exposure and survival. Just as muscles grow stronger through progressive resistance training, your capacity to handle fear-inducing situations expands through deliberate exposure. You wouldn't attempt to lift your maximum weight without first building foundational strength through increasingly challenging loads. Similarly, lasting courage develops not through dramatic leaps into overwhelming situations, but through carefully calibrated steps that stretch your comfort zone without shattering it. The process of habituation, your brain's natural tendency to reduce its response to repeated stimuli, works in your favor when systematically applied to fear-inducing situations. Each time you engage with a challenging scenario and survive, your nervous system receives vital data. This situation, while uncomfortable, isn't actually threatening. Over time, this accumulation of evidence literally rewires your brain's threat detection circuitry. You might worry that deliberately facing fear could intensify your anxiety or create new trauma. This concern stems from instances of random exposure or being thrown into overwhelming situations without proper preparation. The key distinction lies in systematic desensitization, a methodical approach that respects your current threshold while gradually expanding it. Think of your fear response as a muscle that's been trained to contract automatically in certain situations. Through progressive exposure, you're not eliminating this response, but rather teaching it greater discrimination and control. Just as a trained athlete maintains their protective reflexes while developing precise control over their movements, you can maintain healthy caution while expanding your capacity for courageous action. The process begins by mapping your personal fear territory, identifying situations that trigger avoidance, and arranging them in order of intensity. Starting with challenges just slightly beyond your comfort zone creates sustainable progress without overwhelming your system. Each successful engagement builds confidence while providing valuable data to your nervous system about your true capabilities. Your threshold for handling fear-inducing situations isn't a fixed limitation, but a flexible boundary that responds to deliberate practice. By understanding this fundamental truth, you transform fear from an immovable obstacle into a series of manageable challenges that, when approached systematically, lead to expanded capability and confidence. The key lies in consistency rather than intensity. Small, regular exposures to challenging situations prove far more effective than occasional dramatic confrontations. This mirrors the principle of physical training. Frequent, manageable workouts produce better results than sporadic, extreme efforts. Consider public speaking as an example. Rather than forcing yourself onto a large stage before you're ready, begin with smaller steps. Speaking up more in familiar group settings, sharing thoughts in team meetings, giving informal presentations to supportive colleagues. Each successful experience, no matter how modest, contributes to expanding your capacity. This incremental approach might seem slow compared to pushing yourself into maximum exposure, but it creates lasting neural pathways that support sustained courage rather than temporary bravado. Your brain requires time to integrate new experiences and update its threat assessment protocols. Respecting this biological reality leads to more reliable and permanent transformation. The goal isn't to eliminate fear, but to expand your capacity to function effectively in its presence. Through systematic exposure, you're not becoming fearless. You're becoming more capable of taking meaningful action despite fear. This distinction proves crucial for sustainable growth. Remember that expansion happens at the edge of comfort, not in the center of chaos. By carefully selecting challenges that stretch without overwhelming you, you create optimal conditions for growth. Each small victory recalibrates your system's understanding of what's possible, gradually expanding the territory where you can operate with confidence. Your capacity for handling fear-inducing situations isn't a fixed trait, but a trainable skill. Through deliberate, progressive exposure, you can systematically expand your comfort zone and build lasting courage. The key lies not in dramatic gestures, but in consistent engagement with manageable challenges that gradually stretch your capabilities. Chapter 11: The Observer's Perch. Developing Emotional Distance. Your relationship with fear changes dramatically when you learn to observe it rather than become consumed by it. This profound shift from "I am afraid" to "I notice I'm feeling afraid" creates a space of freedom, a gap between stimulus and response where choice becomes possible. Think of your consciousness as a vast sky, and your emotions as weather patterns moving through it. Just as the sky remains unchanged regardless of whether storms or sunshine pass through, your essential nature remains constant, despite the emotional weather you experience. When fear arises, you can learn to watch it like a meteorologist observing an approaching storm system, with interest and awareness, rather than resistance or identification. This observer perspective represents one of the most powerful transformations in your relationship with fear. Rather than being swept away by the intensity of emotion, you develop the capacity to witness it while maintaining your center. This isn't about suppressing or avoiding feelings, quite the opposite. It's about developing the ability to fully experience emotions while maintaining enough psychological distance to choose your response. The brain's natural tendency is to merge completely with emotional states, especially intense ones like fear. When fear arises, it typically consumes our entire field of awareness, making it seem as if we are the fear rather than experiencing fear. This complete identification leaves no room for perspective or choice. We become reactive rather than responsive. But through deliberate practice, you can strengthen your capacity to maintain awareness even as strong emotions arise. This creates a profound shift in your experience. Instead of "I'm terrified," you notice fear is present right now. Instead of "I can't handle this," you observe thoughts about inability are appearing. This slight shift in perspective changes everything about how you relate to challenging situations. This observer capacity operates like a perch above turbulent waters. From this vantage point, you can see the currents of emotion swirling below without being swept away by them. You maintain the ability to think clearly and choose consciously rather than react automatically from within the emotion. The development of this perspective doesn't mean becoming cold or detached. You're not suppressing or disconnecting from your emotions. You're developing the capacity to experience them fully while maintaining enough distance to respond wisely. This is the difference between being submerged in water versus floating on its surface. Both involve full contact with the water, but one position allows for much greater freedom of movement and choice. When strong emotions arise, most people either resist them, trying to push away or control the feeling, or become completely identified with them, losing all perspective and choice. The observer perspective offers a middle path, fully acknowledging and experiencing emotions while maintaining enough distance to choose how to respond to them. This capacity proves especially valuable when facing fear-inducing situations. Rather than becoming completely consumed by anxious thoughts and sensations, you can watch them arise and pass like weather patterns moving through the sky of awareness. This doesn't make the fear disappear, but it fundamentally changes your relationship with it. The shift from "I am afraid" to "I notice fear arising" may seem subtle, but it creates space for an entirely different kind of response. Instead of fear controlling your actions, you maintain the ability to act despite its presence. You can acknowledge the fear while choosing to move forward anyway, knowing that like all weather patterns, this too shall pass. This observer perspective becomes even more powerful when combined with mindful awareness of bodily sensations. Rather than getting lost in mental narratives about what might go wrong, you can notice physical sensations directly: increased heart rate, muscle tension, shallow breathing, without adding layers of interpretation or resistance. The human nervous system operates much like a pond. It can either be turbulent and cloudy or still and clear. When completely identified with fear, the system becomes agitated, making clear perception impossible. The observer perspective allows the pond to settle, enabling you to see both the fear and potential responses more clearly. This isn't about achieving some perfect state of detachment. The goal is developing enough distance from fear to maintain choice while still fully engaging with life. Like learning to swim, you develop confidence not by avoiding water, but by discovering you can stay afloat even in deeper waters. Your capacity for maintaining this perspective strengthens through practice, just like any other skill. Each time you catch yourself merging with fear and choose to step back into the observer position, you reinforce this vital ability. Over time, this creates a fundamental shift in how you experience challenging situations. This transformed relationship with fear opens up new possibilities for action. Rather than waiting for fear to subside before moving forward, you can acknowledge its presence while choosing your response. This is the essence of emotional freedom, not the absence of fear, but the ability to maintain perspective and choice in its presence. Chapter 12. The Action Habit: Building Momentum Through Small Wins. When you face a challenging task or opportunity, your initial resistance is always at its peak. This moment, the space between intention and action, determines whether you'll remain trapped in hesitation or begin generating unstoppable momentum. Understanding this critical threshold can transform how you approach every fear-inducing situation. The physics of human behavior mirror the principles that govern physical objects. Just as a stationary object requires significant force to begin moving, but becomes easier to maintain in motion, your psychological resistance is highest before taking action and diminishes substantially once you begin. This phenomenon explains why starting feels disproportionately difficult compared to continuing. Your brain's threat detection system is most active when facing the unknown. Your neural pathways operate on a reward-based system, releasing dopamine not just for achieving goals, but for making progress toward them. Each action you take, no matter how small, triggers this reward response, creating a biochemical foundation for momentum. When you consistently act despite fear, you're not just accomplishing individual tasks. You're rewiring your brain's relationship with action itself. Think of this process like a massive flywheel, a heavy wheel that requires tremendous initial force to begin rotating. The first push is always the hardest, demanding significant energy to overcome inertia. But with each subsequent push, the wheel moves more easily, eventually generating its own momentum that makes continued motion almost effortless. Your relationship with action follows this same pattern. The power of this momentum principle becomes evident in how successful action influences your brain's prediction systems. When you consistently take action despite fear, your neural networks begin anticipating positive outcomes rather than catastrophizing potential failures. This shift creates a self-reinforcing cycle where action becomes your default response rather than hesitation. Resistance to getting started doesn't indicate weakness or lack of motivation. It's a natural consequence of your brain's conservative energy systems. Your mind instinctively preserves energy by maintaining current states rather than initiating new ones. Understanding this helps you recognize that the urge to procrastinate isn't personal. It's a basic operating principle of human psychology that can be systematically overcome through strategic action. The key lies in recognizing that momentum builds through consistency rather than intensity. You don't need grand, dramatic actions to initiate this cycle. In fact, smaller actions often prove more effective because they stay below your fear threshold while still triggering the reward systems that generate momentum. Each micro-action strengthens your action-taking neural pathways, making the next step incrementally easier. Your brain's reward system doesn't distinguish between small wins and major achievements. It responds to progress itself. When you consistently accumulate small victories, you create a psychological environment where action becomes increasingly automatic. The more you act, the more your brain expects to act, creating a self-perpetuating cycle of momentum. This explains why successful people often appear to have an addiction to action. They've developed neural pathways that make action more appealing than hesitation. What begins as conscious effort eventually becomes a natural inclination, much like how a flywheel's momentum makes continued motion easier than stopping. You can harness this principle by intentionally lowering your action threshold. Rather than waiting for motivation or trying to overcome fear directly, focus on identifying the smallest possible step that moves you forward. This might mean sending a single email, making a 30-second phone call, or writing one paragraph. The specific action matters less than its ability to initiate movement. By focusing on small, manageable actions, you bypass the paralysis that comes from contemplating larger fears. Each micro-action serves as a flywheel push, gradually building the momentum that makes larger actions possible. This creates a foundation of evidence that contradicts fear-based thinking, as each successful action demonstrates your capability rather than your limitations. The cyclical nature of this process means that action itself becomes the antidote to fear, rather than trying to eliminate fear before acting. Each step forward, no matter how small, generates energy for the next step, creating a sustainable path toward your goals that doesn't rely on motivation or fearlessness. This energy conversion, from the stagnation of fear to the momentum of action, represents one of the most powerful transformations available to you. It doesn't require special techniques or perfect circumstances, just the willingness to initiate movement, however small, and trust in the compound effect of consistent action. Chapter 13. The Regret Reversal, Using Future Perspective to Motivate Present Action. Looking back from the future, every moment of hesitation reveals itself for what it truly was. Not prudent caution, but fear masquerading as wisdom. When you stand at the crossroads between action and avoidance, your present moment perspective can deceive you, making potential risks loom large while obscuring the crushing weight of accumulated regret. Time offers a uniquely clarifying lens. Research consistently shows that when people reach the end of their lives, their deepest regrets center not on actions taken, but on chances never seized. They don't lament the failures that came from trying. They mourn the possibilities left unexplored, the dreams abandoned at the threshold of action, the words left unspoken. This revelation transforms how we must evaluate risk. What feels overwhelming at the moment, starting a business, having a difficult conversation, pursuing a passion, often appears trivial when viewed from a distance. Yet the pain of opportunities forever lost grows sharper with time, cutting deeper as years pass and possibilities recede. Consider how your future self will view your current hesitation. From their vantage point, today's fears will likely appear as paper tigers, frightening in appearance but ultimately hollow. They'll see with perfect clarity how fear distorted your perception, making mountains of molehills while obscuring the true cost of inaction. The future perspective reveals a profound truth. The risk of action is temporary, but the pain of regret is permanent. A failure can be learned from, recovered from, even transformed into eventual success. But opportunities missed, due to fear, create wounds that time cannot heal. They become permanent residents in the landscape of regret. This temporal shift in perspective serves as a powerful antidote to fear-based paralysis. When you find yourself hesitating before important action, project yourself forward in time. View your current situation through the lens of your future self. What will they wish you had done? What will seem obvious to them that fear currently obscures from you? The biological brain prioritizes immediate emotional comfort over long-term fulfillment. It will always prefer avoiding short-term discomfort to preventing future regret. This made perfect sense for survival. Our ancestors needed to prioritize immediate threats over distant concerns. But in today's world, this same mechanism often works against our deeper interests. By consciously adopting a future perspective, you can override this biological bias. Rather than asking, "What feels safest right now?" ask, "What choice will I be proudest of having made?" Rather than considering what might go wrong, consider what opportunities might be forever lost through inaction. This shift in temporal perspective doesn't just inform better decisions, it actually transforms how risk feels in the present moment. When you truly internalize how your future self will view today's choices, what previously felt frightening often begins to feel urgent. The fear of failure gets replaced by the fear of regret, creating a powerful motivational force toward action rather than avoidance. The regret minimization perspective particularly illuminates decisions around personal growth and self-expression. While failure in these domains may sting temporarily, remaining forever contracted into a smaller version of yourself creates a special kind of regret, the pain of never having become who you could have been. Think of every choice between action and avoidance as a conversation with your future self. They already know the outcomes. They understand which fears were legitimate warnings and which were illusions. They can see clearly what you're actually choosing between. Not success versus failure, but growth versus stagnation, expansion versus contraction, life fully lived versus life half-lived. When viewed through time's lens, what initially appears as risk often reveals itself as opportunity. What feels like prudent hesitation shows itself as fear-based procrastination. The wisdom of the future perspective cuts through fear's distortions, revealing the true nature of our choices and their consequences. This shift from present fear to future perspective doesn't eliminate the sensation of fear. It simply places that sensation in a larger context where its power to control behavior diminishes. When the pain of projected regret becomes more compelling than the discomfort of present fear, action becomes the natural choice. The future version of you understands this intimately. They've lived through countless moments where fear tried to derail their path, where safety seemed more appealing than growth. Yet time has shown them how those moments of discomfort were merely growing pains, temporary sensations that marked the boundary between who you were and who you were becoming. Your future self knows that each time you choose action over avoidance, you're not just confronting fear, you're expanding your capacity for life itself. Chapter 14. The Identity Shift, Becoming a Person Who Acts Despite Fear. Your identity shapes your actions more profoundly than any technique or strategy ever could. When you define yourself as someone who fears public speaking, That belief becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, creating a feedback loop of avoidance that reinforces the very identity you're trying to escape. But what happens when you begin to see yourself differently? Not as someone fighting against fear, but as someone who takes action regardless of emotional weather. This transformation isn't about positive thinking or forcing yourself to believe something untrue. It's about recognizing that your current self-definition, though it feels permanent and absolute, is actually a constructed narrative that can be consciously reshaped. Research in self-perception theory reveals a counterintuitive truth. Behavior changes often precede and then reinforce identity shifts, not the other way around. You don't have to feel like a confident person to begin acting confidently. In fact, taking confident action is precisely what builds a confident identity. Think of identity as a skin that you've outgrown. Just as a snake must shed its constraining outer layer to continue growing, you must release limiting self-definitions to expand into new possibilities. This process feels uncomfortable precisely because it challenges your existing sense of self. When you've spent years thinking, "I'm not good at confrontation," or "I'm too anxious to lead," acting contrary to these beliefs creates cognitive dissonance, a psychological tension between your actions and your self-concept. This discomfort is not only normal, but necessary for transformation. Each time you act in alignment with your desired identity rather than your habitual one, you create evidence that challenges your limiting beliefs. Over time, these accumulated experiences make it increasingly difficult to maintain old self-definitions that no longer fit who you're becoming. The key is understanding that identity is not fixed, but fluid. You aren't discovering who you really are. You're actively creating who you choose to become through conscious action and attention. This isn't about pretending or forcing yourself into an inauthentic mold. It's about recognizing that your current identity is already a construction, one built through years of interpreting experiences through a particular lens. When you begin seeing yourself as someone who takes action despite discomfort, who grows through challenges rather than avoiding them, your relationship with fear fundamentally shifts. The same physiological sensations that once triggered retreat now signal opportunity. The same situations that once seemed overwhelming become chances to reinforce your evolving self-concept. This identity-based approach transforms how you engage with fear-inducing situations. Instead of asking, "How can I overcome this fear?" you begin asking, "How would someone who embraces challenges approach this situation?" This subtle shift moves you from fighting against your current identity to stepping into an expanded version of yourself. The power of this approach lies in its compounding nature. Each action taken from your new self-concept creates evidence that supports and strengthens it. Every time you follow through despite discomfort, you make it harder to maintain old limiting beliefs about who you are and what you're capable of. Your actions reshape your identity, which in turn makes similar actions more natural and automatic. This transformation doesn't happen overnight. It's a progressive evolution that occurs through consistent small actions aligned with your chosen identity. Rather than trying to force massive change through willpower, focus on taking actions that someone with your desired identity would naturally take. Let these behaviors gradually reshape how you see yourself. This is not about replacing fear with fearlessness. It's about evolving your relationship with fear through a fundamentally different self-concept. When you see yourself as someone who acts courageously rather than someone who needs to overcome fear, the same sensations of discomfort become integrated into your identity rather than standing in opposition to it. This shift in self-concept creates a profound change in how you approach challenges. What once required immense willpower begins to feel like a natural expression of who you are. The question moves from, "Can I handle this?" to, "How will I handle this?" A subtle but crucial distinction that reflects a fundamentally different relationship with fear and action. Your brain stops treating discomfort as a signal to retreat and starts recognizing it as confirmation that you're expanding into new territory. Each time you act from this transformed identity, you reinforce a deeper truth. That courage isn't something you need to manufacture, but rather an innate quality you're finally allowing to express itself. The sensations that once paralyzed you become familiar companions on your journey of growth, no longer holding the power to derail your progress. Chapter 15: The Success Spiral. Creating Positive Feedback Loops. Creating positive feedback loops that reinforce action isn't just helpful, it's essential for lasting transformation. Your brain is constantly learning from experience, building neural pathways that either support or inhibit future behavior. When you consistently pair action with recognition and reward, you create an ascending spiral where each success makes the next one more accessible. This isn't about artificial celebration or forcing positivity. It's about understanding and working with your brain's natural reward system. Research in neuroscience reveals that dopamine release during progress recognition strengthens behavioral patterns, making similar actions more likely in the future. Each time you acknowledge progress, no matter how small, you're literally rewiring your brain to associate action taking with reward. Think of this process like an ascending spiral. Unlike a simple cycle that returns to its starting point, a spiral builds upon each revolution, creating progressive momentum. Every successful action provides evidence of capability, builds confidence, and creates positive expectation for the next challenge. This upward movement becomes self-reinforcing as each win makes the next one more accessible. Many people struggle with this process because they discount small wins or fixate on the gap between current reality and ultimate goals. When you're working toward a significant objective, taking a single small step can feel insignificant. But this perspective fails to recognize how behavioral change actually works. Your brain doesn't distinguish between small and large wins in terms of their reinforcement value. It responds to the recognition itself. The key is making progress visible and celebration intentional. This isn't about throwing a party for sending an email. It's about consciously acknowledging each action that moves you forward. When you track and celebrate progress systematically, you create a psychological environment that supports continued action rather than hesitation. This approach might initially feel artificial or unnecessary. After all, shouldn't meaningful achievement be its own reward? But this overlooks how powerfully our actions are shaped by immediate feedback. Your brain evolved to respond strongly to clear, immediate rewards rather than distant outcomes. By creating explicit recognition systems, you're working with this natural tendency rather than against it. Progress markers and rewards must be personally meaningful to be effective. Generic gold stars or checkbox systems won't create lasting change unless they connect with what genuinely motivates you. This might mean tracking streaks of consistent action, maintaining a visible record of wins, or creating small but meaningful rewards that reinforce your identity as someone who takes action. The most effective feedback loops connect immediate actions to larger meaning. Each small step becomes significant not just for its immediate outcome, but for what it represents. Evidence of your capacity to move through fear, proof of your evolving identity, confirmation that action breeds clarity. This meaning-making process transforms routine actions into building blocks of transformation. Creating success spirals requires deliberate attention to what supports your particular psychology. Some people thrive on public accountability, while others need private reflection. Some respond strongly to visual progress tracking, while others connect more with written acknowledgement. The key is designing systems that resonate with your personal motivational patterns. Your brain is already creating feedback loops based on how you respond to challenge and opportunity. By consciously designing positive reinforcement systems, you take control of this process rather than leaving it to chance. Each recognized success, no matter how small, strengthens neural pathways that support future action, gradually transforming what once felt impossible into your new normal. This system-based approach transcends pure willpower or motivation. Instead of relying on fleeting emotional states, you're creating persistent structures that naturally encourage action. Over time, these feedback loops become self-sustaining, requiring less conscious effort as the ascending spiral gains momentum through consistent reinforcement. The power of positive feedback loops lies in their cumulative effect. While any single instance of recognition might seem minor, the compound impact of consistent reinforcement creates profound transformation. Each supported action builds evidence for your capability, strengthens your action-taking identity, and makes the next step more accessible. This momentum grows exponentially. What begins as small victories gradually expands into breakthrough achievements that once seemed unthinkable. You're not just accumulating isolated wins. You're fundamentally rewiring how your brain processes challenge and opportunity. Every time you acknowledge progress, you're literally sculpting neural pathways that make bold action feel increasingly natural and hesitation increasingly foreign. Chapter 16. The Clarity Quest, Finding Direction Through Movement. You can't steer a parked car. This simple truth contains one of the most powerful insights about clarity and direction in life. So many people remain stuck waiting for perfect certainty before taking action, not realizing that clarity emerges through movement rather than contemplation. Think about the last time you felt paralyzed by uncertainty. Perhaps you were considering a career change, starting a business, or making a major life decision. The natural instinct is to try to figure everything out first, to map the entire journey before taking the first step. This seems logical and responsible, yet it's precisely this waiting for complete clarity that keeps you stuck. The brain craves certainty. It wants to eliminate all risk before committing to action. But this creates a paradox. The very clarity you're waiting for can only come through engagement with the challenge itself. It's like trying to learn to swim by reading books about swimming. At some point, you have to get in the water. Research consistently shows that certainty follows action rather than preceding it. When psychologists study decision-making patterns, they find that conviction often develops after commitment, not before. This isn't just true for major life decisions. It's how the brain naturally works in all areas. The neural pathways that create certainty are built through experience, not through analysis. Consider how a car's power steering works. When the vehicle is stationary, the steering wheel feels heavy and resistant. But once the car is moving, even slight adjustments to the wheel create clear directional changes. Your life works the same way. Movement creates maneuverability. Action generates feedback. Engagement produces clarity. This insight challenges the common cultural assumption that we should feel completely certain before taking action. While this might seem prudent, it actually reverses the natural order of how clarity develops. You don't get clarity first and then act. You act first and clarity emerges from the engagement. You might worry, but what if I start moving in the wrong direction? This concern assumes there's a perfect path waiting to be discovered through enough analysis. In reality, any direction that generates movement and feedback will provide more useful information than endless contemplation. The feedback loop created by action will naturally guide you toward better choices. Think of clarity as a byproduct of engagement rather than a prerequisite for it. When you begin moving forward, even with incomplete information, several powerful things happen. First, you start receiving real-world feedback that no amount of analysis could provide. Second, you develop practical insights that are impossible to gain through theoretical contemplation. Third, you build momentum that makes further action easier. The path reveals itself through movement. Each step you take creates visibility for the next few steps. While you can't see the entire journey from the starting point, you don't need to. You only need enough clarity for the next meaningful action. The horizon of visibility naturally expands as you move forward. Understanding this principle transforms how you approach uncertainty. Instead of waiting for complete clarity before acting, you recognize that clarity emerges through the process of engagement itself. This doesn't mean acting recklessly or without thought. It means accepting that perfect certainty is neither possible nor necessary to begin. When you find yourself stuck waiting for clarity, remember that you're trying to steer a parked car. The very movement you're waiting to feel certain about can only come through engaging with the situation itself. Each step creates feedback that informs the next step, gradually building both clarity and confidence through direct experience. This truth applies across all areas of life. Whether you're developing a new skill, building a business, improving a relationship, or pursuing any meaningful goal, clarity comes through engagement rather than analysis. The path becomes clear through walking it, not through standing still and trying to see the end from the beginning. Notice the areas in your life where waiting for perfect clarity has created stagnation. Where have you been trying to steer a parked car? What movements, even small ones, could you make to start generating real-world feedback? Remember that clarity isn't a prerequisite for action. It's a result of it. The irony is that your desire for certainty often becomes the very obstacle blocking your path forward. By waiting for a clear signal that may never come, you miss countless opportunities to gather the precise information you need through direct experience. Even the smallest action, sending that email, making that call, writing that first paragraph, creates ripples of feedback that illuminate your next step. Your movement, however uncertain it feels, is the lantern that lights the way. Chapter 17. The Fear Fallacy, Exposing the Myths That Keep You Stuck. Your brain has constructed an intricate web of beliefs about fear, assumptions so deeply embedded that you've likely never questioned their validity. These beliefs, more than fear itself, determine your actions and limitations. What you believe about fear shapes how you respond to it, creating invisible boundaries that constrain your choices and possibilities. Consider how certain interpretations about fear have become accepted truths in your mind. That fear means stop, that confident people don't experience fear, that fear naturally diminishes with time, that fear indicates lack of readiness, or that the absence of fear signals the right path. These seemingly logical beliefs form a complex knot of misunderstanding that keeps you trapped in patterns of hesitation and avoidance. The cultural narrative around fear reinforces many of these limiting beliefs. Stories celebrating fearless heroes suggest that courage means absence of fear rather than action in its presence. Common phrases like "trust your gut" can be misinterpreted to mean that fear always indicates danger rather than opportunity. When you observe others taking bold action, you might assume they feel no fear, not realizing they've simply learned to act alongside it. Each of these misunderstandings contains a grain of truth that makes it seem valid. Yes, sometimes fear warns of genuine danger. Yes, familiarity can reduce fear in certain situations. Yes, preparation can help manage fear. But when these partial truths become rigid rules, they create unnecessary limitations that prevent growth and achievement. The belief that fear means stop ignores fear's role as a compass pointing toward growth. Interpreting fear as a warning to retreat creates a self-fulfilling prophecy where you avoid the very experiences that would expand your capabilities. The assumption that confident people don't feel afraid leads to shame about your own fear, adding an extra layer of resistance to taking action. Believing that fear naturally diminishes with time creates passive waiting rather than active engagement. This misunderstanding keeps you stuck hoping for courage to arrive instead of building it through progressive action. Similarly, interpreting fear as evidence of lack of readiness prevents you from recognizing that readiness often develops through engagement rather than preparation. The fallacy that absence of fear indicates the right path can be particularly limiting. This belief causes you to question or abandon meaningful pursuits simply because they trigger fear, not recognizing that your most significant opportunities will naturally create resistance because they require you to expand beyond your comfort zone. These beliefs form an interconnected web, each reinforcing the others. The belief that fear means stop supports the assumption that confident people don't feel afraid. The idea that fear indicates lack of readiness strengthens the belief that fear should diminish before action. Together, these misunderstandings create a self-reinforcing system that magnifies fear's power far beyond its actual impact. Examining your personal collection of fear beliefs reveals how these assumptions influence your choices. Perhaps you've avoided public speaking because you believed fear meant you weren't ready. Maybe you've questioned your career direction because the path that excited you also scared you. These limitations stem not from fear itself, but from your interpretation of what fear means. Recognizing these fallacies as beliefs rather than truths creates space for new interpretations. Fear can be reframed as excitement, as a growth signal, or simply as the natural sensation that accompanies meaningful action. Confident people can be understood as those who act alongside fear, rather than those who never feel it. Readiness can be redefined as willingness to begin rather than absence of fear. This untangling of fear fallacies doesn't require eliminating fear. It simply involves updating your understanding of what fear means. When you recognize how these beliefs have limited you, you gain the freedom to choose new interpretations that support rather than restrict your growth. Your relationship with fear transforms not through fighting the emotion, but through changing the meaning you assign to it. What once appeared as a wall blocking your path becomes a doorway, inviting exploration. The sensation in your chest that used to signal retreat now marks the threshold of expansion. You're not changing the feeling itself. You're awakening to its true nature as a catalyst rather than a constraint. This shift happens naturally once you see through the illusions that have kept fear's power artificially inflated in your mind. Chapter 18. The Freedom Paradox. Finding Liberation Through Commitment. The fear that prevents you from making life's most significant decisions operates through a fascinating paradox. It gains its greatest power not from the magnitude of what you face, but from your partial commitment to facing it. When you stand at the threshold of meaningful change, testing the waters with tentative steps while maintaining a safe retreat, You create the perfect breeding ground for fear to flourish. Fear thrives in this middle space, the gap between consideration and commitment, between thinking about action and fully dedicating yourself to it. This persistent anxiety that accompanies major life decisions doesn't stem primarily from the challenges ahead, but from the internal conflict of holding contradictory positions. Your mind, designed to seek consistency, experiences significant distress when simultaneously moving toward and away from the same goal. This cognitive dissonance manifests as heightened anxiety, doubt, and fear, not because the path ahead is necessarily dangerous, but because your divided attention creates psychological turbulence. The resolution to this tension often arrives through what appears counterintuitive. Full commitment frequently dissolves the very fears that prevented commitment in the first place. When you fully dedicate yourself to a path, the mental energy previously spent maintaining escape routes and backup plans becomes available for forward movement. The anxiety that seemed an inherent part of the challenge often reveals itself as an artifact of incomplete commitment rather than a warning about the path itself. Consider how your mind responds differently to decisions already made versus those still under consideration. Once you fully commit to a course of action, the endless loops of what if thinking naturally subside. The energy previously consumed by weighing options transforms into fuel for implementation. This shift occurs not because the external circumstances have changed, but because internal resistance dissolves in the face of wholehearted dedication. In today's culture, which celebrates endless options and maximum flexibility, the idea of full commitment often triggers its own kind of fear. The prevailing wisdom suggests keeping all options open as long as possible, treating decisive action as somewhat reckless or naive. Yet this approach, while appearing prudent, often creates more anxiety than it prevents. Each unmade decision, each partially committed path, becomes a source of ongoing psychological strain. This dynamic reveals itself clearly in professional transitions, relationship commitments, creative projects, and personal transformations. In each case, the period of greatest distress typically occurs not during full engagement with the challenge, but in the space of partial commitment, when you're invested enough to feel the stakes, but not enough to access the clarity and power that come with complete dedication. The freedom that emerges through full commitment often surprises those who experience it. Rather than feeling trapped by their decision, many discover an unexpected liberation. When you fully commit to a path, the mental energy previously spent second-guessing and maintaining backup plans becomes available for creative problem-solving and forward movement. The very act of commitment often reveals resources and opportunities that remain invisible from the perspective of partial engagement. This principle operates at both major and minor scales. Whether deciding to start a business, deepen a relationship, move to a new city, or simply tackle a challenging project, the psychology remains consistent. Fear gains its greatest power not from the magnitude of the challenge, but from the incompleteness of your commitment to facing it. The question then becomes not whether a particular path is completely safe or guaranteed to succeed, but whether your current approach of partial commitment is generating more security or more suffering. Often, the very attempt to maintain ultimate safety through hedging and hesitation creates the anxiety you're trying to avoid. Understanding this dynamic transforms how you might approach significant decisions. Rather than waiting for fear to subside before committing fully, you might recognize that full commitment itself often dissolves the fear that prevented commitment in the first place. This doesn't mean acting recklessly or without consideration, but rather recognizing that at some point, Analysis must give way to dedication. This insight carries profound implications for personal growth and achievement. Many of life's most meaningful opportunities require a level of commitment before they reveal their full potential. Just as a trapeze artist must release one bar to grasp the next, some forms of security must be released to access new possibilities. The safety you seek to maintain through partial commitment often prevents the very experiences that would lead to genuine security through growth and achievement. Conclusion. Throughout this book, you've undertaken a profound journey of transformation, one that has fundamentally altered your relationship with fear. You've moved from seeing fear as an immovable obstacle to recognizing it as valuable information that guides your growth and expansion. This shift represents more than just a change in perspective. It marks the development of a new relationship with the very force that once held you back. You now possess multiple lenses through which to view and understand fear, as a paper tiger whose apparent substance dissolves when approached directly, as a reliable compass pointing toward opportunities for growth rather than danger, as potential energy awaiting conversion into forward momentum, and as a threshold marking the entrance to new capability. These perspectives provide a comprehensive toolkit for navigating the emotional landscape of meaningful action. The journey began with understanding fear's true nature, how it creates optical illusions of danger where none exists, how it distorts thinking through echo chambers of worry, and how it magnifies anticipated judgment far beyond reality. You learn that fear's power comes primarily from misinterpretation rather than any inherent authority. From this foundation, you moved into transforming your relationship with fear, discovering how to convert nervous energy into excitement, how to recognize fear as protection of deeper aspects of identity, and how to create psychological space through the observer perspective. These tools enabled you to engage with fear rather than fight against it. Finally, you developed practical approaches for becoming naturally action-oriented, understanding how momentum builds through small wins, how clarity emerges through movement rather than analysis, and how full commitment often dissolves the very fears that prevent action. This progression equipped you with concrete strategies for maintaining forward motion despite emotional resistance. It's important to acknowledge that this work is ongoing. Fear never completely disappears from life, nor should it. Instead, it becomes progressively more manageable as your relationship with it transforms. You've developed the capacity to recognize discomfort as valuable feedback, rather than a warning to retreat, understanding that courage isn't the absence of fear, but rather your transformed relationship with it. When setbacks occur and old patterns temporarily resurface, remember that these moments don't negate your progress. They simply provide opportunities to reinforce and deepen your new understanding. This transformed relationship with fear affects not just individual actions, but your entire life trajectory, influencing your identity, relationships, and the scope of what you believe possible. Your capacity for meaningful action despite fear serves as the ultimate catalyst for creating the life you truly desire. By embracing discomfort as the price of an extraordinary life, you free yourself to act decisively in alignment with your deepest values, regardless of emotional weather. The path ahead still contains challenges, but you now possess the understanding and tools to move through them with purpose and clarity. Thank you for listening to my audiobook. Thank you for listening to my audiobook. You've taken the first step. Now go write your story, one action at a time. You've got this.